Thank you, everybody, for coming today. My name is Carol Bousquet, and I feel quite privileged to be able to speak for our new citizen advocacy group that we've named 3A for Ipswich. And we have formed, and we are doing coffees in people's homes. The challenge being addressing mostly fiction about this law. And as some of us may or may not know, it was postponed at our last town meeting this fall. And very dramatically by an amendment was made, and the amendment won by one vote. And that postponement was based on waiting for the outcome of the Milton SJC case. And it was not a rejection of 3A. It was a postponement to vote. So we've learned a lot since then, and we're here now. This comes up May 13 at our town meeting, and we're 3A MBTA Communities Act is, I'm alleging, a gift for Ipswich. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly why as we proceed. It is a change in zoning. That's it. It's just that simple. It gets complicated if you let it. It's a change in zoning. It removes the need for special permitting in order to build multifamily housing in the very specific overlay area around the train station. And that special permit is costly and time consuming. It's costly because it requires attorneys to see it through the process. It can take 1 to 2 years. By removing the special permit, now someone who wants to develop a multifamily unit can build what they call by right. It's just that simple. Now, a lot of folks are arguing that the law itself, the way it's written, is arguable, and they're basing their opposition on that. The consequence is the loss of millions of dollars in grant monies. That was discussed at our Ipswich Planning Board last evening, that those monies are some serious monies over time. Another one of the opponent complaints is there's not enough water to service more building of homes. And we're going to let one of our speakers here this morning address that. My personal experiences, I moved to Ipswich 7 years ago into senior housing. I'm a veteran. I've had 2 joints replaced in the last 3 years, moving into senior housing, which is accommodating to people with either disabilities or limitations, has been a blessing for me. I used to be in real estate years ago. I used to be the Women's Employment Coordinator for a charity that managed housing and services for veterans throughout all of the New England states. I am familiar with the need for housing from across the spectrum. I don't mind leading the charge. I am passionate about the need to open up housing or create more housing. Another point of contention for folks is this affordable housing or not? And why not, if not? It doesn't dictate that what is built is affordable. And so then why would you do that? Well, you add to the stock. So the more housing you have, the more reasonable your pricing becomes. It's just like not having enough eggs. You see the egg prices skyrocket because they're not available. That's what's happening to our housing. So there's literature here. There's even a statement from our town historian, Gordon Harris, and I don't mind highlighting that downtown you see, or in the overlay district, that used to be multifamily housing. historically. And in Ipswich, always remember, it's a 3-story maximum, so we're not talking about someone coming in and building high-rises. You know, people argue, I don't want Ipswich looking like Beverly. It's impossible. It is impossible in our beautiful little town. So why don't we get to it? And I'm going to introduce Patrick McGuire, who's the CEO of North Shore Realtors next. It is Fair Housing Month, and I'll let him describe the meaning of that and what the market might look like under these circumstances. Thank you for being here, Patrick.
Thanks so much for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here, and what I want to try to do is kind of give context to the conversation we were having around 3A. There's been, I think, a lot of side conversations, and it kind of derails, what we're looking at and kind of the purpose of why some of this legislation might have been produced and accepted. And so, first of all, again, thank you for acknowledging Fair Housing Month. This is something every April we really try to focus on making sure housing is available and fair for everyone. The people who are already residents in the community, people who desire to be residents in the community, no matter their background, income level, any of their circumstances, that anyone who dreams of home ownership at some point in time will have an avenue to get there. So it's so important to reiterate that message every April. So, what does the Ipswich housing market look like? If you go to the first slide, please. So this is what we have on right now. So this is active as of yesterday. We mostly concentrate on single-family housing. The condos are a little bit more complex when we do the numbers, but we'll have some reference to them as well. Yesterday there was 11 single families for sale. The median list price in Ipswich is $1.4 million. Of those 11, only 4 homes were under $1 million. The lowest was $650, and the highest was $2.6. So that's about the range that you're looking at if you're trying to get into Ipswich. Better numbers to look at is what things actually sold for. So the sold market over the last year, there was 91 sold single families, and the median sale price was $935,000. So a little bit above the median for Essex County, but not too bad. Next slide, please. So, is it affordable? Who is it affordable for? Who can gain access to home ownership of single-family units? So we do kind of reverse engineering in those numbers, all right? So we have a couple givens. We give that we want about 36% of your monthly income to go towards like debt service, right? Or your housing costs. 14% down for your down payment. That's about the national average across the country. And we're estimating a 6% interest rate. It's a little higher right now. We're probably getting closer to 7%. But that is wavering kind of in that band. So we're going to be a little generous, and we're going to make it 6%. So if we do the numbers for $935,000 as purchase price, your household would need to earn $222,000 annually. So that is basically the get-in number to become a resident of Ipswich. If we do look at a 7% interest rate, which may be a little more honest right now, to get those same terms, you'd have to come with about $80,000 more in cash to purchase the same house, just if that interest rate swings. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know what we need. We need $222,000 to get in. So who would be able to produce that kind of number? The number I always like to look at first is the median household income for a given city or town. So this is from 2023, from the census. And for Ipswich, that's $125,000-ish. So we can see there's a very large gap there, and then the number that we actually need to purchase. The median household income does not come close to the median sale price of a single family home. I like to look at teachers too, because their income is readily available online, and they're one of your community service members, right? Your police officers, your teachers, your fire department. So we got to do dual income, and that's not strange for Ipswich. It's pretty much any city or town you can see around here. Dual income for a teacher is the average income for a teacher in the Ipswich school system. It's about $83,000, so you double it to about $167,000. So still, we're not quite there with the income that we need to do. So the other thing I like to look at, spatially as you get like deeper into Cape Ann or for Ipswich as well, is can you afford to pay your employee if you're a manager or business owner? So the number that we need to hit would be the $111,000. right? And that's given the fact that we're hoping that they have a partner or someone else can contribute to that income at an equal rate. So as a business owner, do you think you could pay your employees $111,000 in a given year? So that would be, of course, depend on the business. Next slide, please. Thank you. So those numbers may be hard to reach, so what we'll do is we will increase to 50% of monthly income going towards housing and debt service. Same other rates. So now you only need $150,000 in annual income to purchase that same exact property. So if we go back to the other slide, we know the dual teachers can now potentially purchase that property. The median household in Ipswich still could not. They would still be pretty decently short, right? About $25,000. And the thing to note, so if you're at 50%, you are severely cost burdened with your debt service, right? You'd have to really try to find a lender who would even give you this type of terms on your loan. You might not even get approved for a loan in this range. The other thing that we didn't kind of hit on, obviously we were using 36% before. That actually does mean that you're cost burden in your debt service. You really want to be under a third. It's really not realistic to look at those numbers to try to get into basically any of our communities across Essex County. So next slide, please. So people do ask about condos. They say, well, you can't afford the single families. Can we get into condos? Condos are kind of that starter unit. You can kind of get in, settle, and then maybe you can move up over time. Moving up, maybe a different issue that we won't touch upon today. But here's just a little condo numbers if people were wondering about that. I did them both in the same slide. So the big thing about condos is the condo fee. So I looked through most of the solds. I thought a $500 a month condo fee was pretty reasonable, is what you should expect. Obviously, that's a $500 fee you're paying every month, so that really changes what your price point is going to be. So the median condo sale price last year was $605,000. So you'd have to make 182 or 132 if you were going to be 50% cost burden. So still even 50% cost burden with the median condo in Ipswich, current Ipswich resident, their household income still would not make it there. So these are numbers we really look at. This is not an unusual story for Ipswich. Your condo economy is actually pretty good compared to some of your neighbors. Some of your neighbors, the condo buying is actually worse than trying to buy a single family. But this is the story that we're seeing around the county. And this is why this conversation is happening, right? When you start to see all our communities across Essex County where the median household income with the people who live there cannot purchase there, then we're identifying what could potentially be a problem, all right? So if you go to the next slide, please. So here's kind of the regional situation we're in. You kind of know the numbers by Ipswich. And I think the one thing about looking at those numbers, it feels a lot different than like driving around the community. I lived in Ipswich for a number of years. It's a wonderful, beautiful community. And if you identify the situation that we're having as a housing crisis, it doesn't look like a crisis, right? The downtown is awesome. You go down to the beaches, it looks amazing. So the housing crisis doesn't really present itself the way a food shortage would or anything like that, right? You can't readily see it. So having the conversation presents new and interesting difficulties, right? Because if you're thinking of a housing shortage, maybe you're thinking of seeing people who are homeless or things like that. That's really not how a housing crisis presents itself. So these are the numbers from the governor, which closely fall in line with the numbers that we internally track throughout the state. We're about 222,000 units short in what we need for housing across Massachusetts. Now, obviously, Ipswich or any other community cannot take this on alone. It has to be a larger approach if we want to even get close to building the units needed. So there's several factors in building units in general, right? So you can look at the cost to build it, your land acquisition, your cost of materials, your cost of skilled labor. If you're a private business, you probably want to make some kind of profit off building the unit. And then there's the cost to get it approved. And Carol touched upon that a little bit earlier. So the cost to get it approved is kind of a sneaky cost that most people don't incorporate into what it takes to build a property. I broke it out into three kind of general categories. So there's one, you can't get it approved at all. So that's never going to get built. Hopefully you don't put too much money into that before you figure that one out. The need for a special permit or a variance. Now that's going to be very common. If Ipswich, if you look at somewhere like the Neck, like that's, you know, variance and special permit city, right? None of those are going to be conforming anymore. You couldn't build most of our communities again. You couldn't build the downtown, the Neck, a lot, you know. If you pick out a specific place that was built before the 1950s, there was no zoning really at that time. So those are not going to conform to new zoning. It's always going to be a special permit or a variance. Those are going to be the most costly because you'll have to, you know, not only go through the process, there's going to be fees involved. You're going to have to get architects, engineers, any kind of skilled people to try to scope out building that project to whatever the specifications are going to be. And then there's by right. So I think that sometimes there is a thought that by right just means you can kind of do whatever you want. That's not really what it is. By right just means you don't need a special permit. That's really all it is. The building inspector will still have to sign off on everything. There's still code that has to be applied to it. It just really takes off a lot of the administrative costs you might have to go through for like a special permitting process. So these are kind of the things that we're seeing on a regional Massachusetts-wide level. And I think that's why you're seeing some of the things out of the state. We're saying, okay, this is a regional issue. No city or town can take this on alone. So what can we put forward to try to address some of these issues? So 3A kind of comes at the cost to get it approved part of this thing, right? So they're taking this, saying, okay, there's all this need for a special permit or variance. How can we drop that down to by right situation to take some of the costs off? Developers, in my experience, like things to be clean and clear and they know what they're getting into. The banks that finance them also like that to be true. And so that's kind of what they're trying to do with the with 3A in general, really. You know, the really good part of this is that, you know, there is basically the requirement to create the 3A zoning. There's also a community conversation around, okay, where does this zoning go? How do we build it? How tall do we want those buildings? Do you want it clustered more dense up? Do you want it kind of spread out? And it's centered around, you know, MBTA resources, right? Especially for Ipswich, you have the train station, so you have something readily available to try to lower concerns about traffic and other things like that that might be raised by the town. So that's kind of the situation that we find ourselves in, both on a local level by the numbers and on a regional level. And this is why this is being proposed in general and what it is trying to accomplish upon approval. All right, that's what happened.
Patrick, can you address the unfunded mandate confusion? The state auditor, Diane DeZoglio, published a piece that the MBTA Communities Act is an unfunded mandate. My understanding is that the opposition uses that as a cudgel, declaring that the town is on the hook for infrastructure improvements when a building project comes along, and that's not the case, if I'm understanding it correctly.
I mean, that would be my understanding as well. It's a zoning overlay, right? So it's an opportunity for these properties to potentially be developed. There's absolutely no requirement for them to be developed. You know, obviously each community adopts its own rules as far as, you know, what infrastructure is required and other things like that. So there's nothing that I've seen in the actual law that would require a community to do that. Right. You know, I think this is, unfortunately we're talking about housing, and fortunately we're talking about housing, right? We're talking about this because it's a massive problem. The state has very historically kind of stayed out of housing and allowed local municipalities to kind of do what they want. 40B would, I guess, be the bigger exception to that, but that was, passed in the 70s. And now, starting with Baker and into the current administration, there is a clear focus that there needs to be kind of a regional input into solving this problem. And I think, 3A is kind of the first in a large wave of things that will be happening, coming from the state level, and that the locals will have to implement. ADUs just got passed as well, and I don't think this will be the end of it. I think we continue. Yeah.
Great.
And,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me introduce Rachel. Thank you very much. We will all remain for questions afterwards, but right now we want to introduce Rachel Belisle-Toller, who's Ipswich's Water Resources Manager. And Rachel has a role within the Ipswich River Watershed Task Force. And I do want her to, I'm sure you probably were planning on it, but I want to make sure that we understand what the task force is and what they're doing. And we invited Rachel because that's one of the biggest complaints about this law is we don't have the water. So I'm going to leave it to Rachel to clarify that point of discussion. And welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much. So like Carl said, I'm the Water Resources Manager for the town. It's very rare to have this role in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There's only one other Water Resources Manager that I know of, in Danvers, in fact. And the reason that we have this role is because we absolutely do have a water problem in Ipswich. We see more and more droughts every single decade. They are more severe, they're happening at different times for longer time periods. So it's understandable that it can be confusing. There's this narrative about water in Ipswich, and so it's very understandable that that kind of gets translated to fear in terms of population growth, for example. So today I'm here because I really want to make sure that we correct some of the misinformation that's flying around out there. I'll be very clear, I'm a town employee, so I am not permitted to make direct statements of advocacy for this particular law. But I do want to talk about water, and I do want to talk about the impact of development on our local water supply. So we can go just another one. So is development bad for the water supply? It depends. It's not really that easy of an answer. So some types of development are certainly poised to have negative effect on the water supply. But it really depends on a couple of things. It depends on where it's developed. So for example, we have these things called water supply protection zones, where most of our supply comes from. In Ipswich, we have 2 reservoirs, Dowbrook and Bullbrook. That's over 60% of our water supply, the surface water, and we also have 5 wells. And we are in the Parker River watershed and the Ipswich River watershed, which are both stressed watersheds, right? And although demand itself is one of the things that has stressed the water supply, there are lots and lots of different reasons. We'll get into that in a second. What kind of development really matters, and how it's developed. And all of those things are things that we're very, very, very deeply focused on a town level and on a regional level. So is development bad? Not always. We would never want to see totally unfettered, rapid growth that just goes and goes and goes, but it's my understanding of this law that that's not really necessarily what's being represented by this zoning change, right? And the one way we can sort of look at why and how development affects the Ipswich water supply is we can talk about, have we experienced growth in the past? Yes, we have, and what has happened to the water supply. So with that said, like I said, the type of housing really matters. Denser housing, highly dense housing, similar to what you might see downtown under perhaps 3A, is more efficient than single family housing. And it's not close. It's not close. It is by far more efficient to have more people in a smaller area, particularly when there's not large outdoor space that's being watered consistently. So we know that's more efficient. We know that apartment buildings and condos in most cases, in Ipswich, but also everywhere. I've looked at our local data, but it's a pretty well-known fact in my industry that dense housing is more water efficient. It covers more people for less water. We'll also talk about why that is pretty soon. So is our water supply stressed? Do we have challenges? Yes, yes, yes. Are those challenges because of population increase? Not exactly. Does it mean we shouldn't continue to grow? Not exactly, right? So next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the data, and you can keep going. Somebody tell me what has happened to our population over the last few years. It's been pretty much increasing for all of history, little by little, right? It's been increasing. Ever since Ipswich became a thing, people have wanted to live here, steadily increasing with a couple exceptions. And this is what's been happening to our total water consumption. It's been going down. That's total gallons, right? And the next slide is per capita. So people are using less water over time. The total amount of water being used is less over time. So when we talk about the impact of development on the water supply, there is more to the story here. So the next slide just talks about, again, consumption has gone down, even though population has gone up. There are actually a couple instances where we've lost a couple, 1,000 or 100 people and water consumption goes up. So it's not necessarily a statistical relationship that you can cite as a reason that development is good or bad, right? It's not something that's statistically significant. There are a lot of other things that are impacting our water supply. So when we talk about how do we figure out what are the metrics that we use to decide if natural resources are being used responsibly and sustainably, there are a couple of metrics, okay? Two of them are the most important. There's something called the residential gallons per capita per day. And that is, I should have written that on the slide. I'm sorry, it's a long one. And that, again, it just talks about per capita water use. It's a measure of how sustainable your residential population is using your water supply. Massachusetts, as environmentally friendly as we are, we always try and be aggressive with those standards. The state standard for that is 65 gallons per day, per capita. In Ipswich, we are at 41. We're well below the state average. We are well below the regional average. We are in the top, I'm going to say 20 towns in the Commonwealth out of the 350 or so. So per capita, on a household basis, we use very little water compared to our neighbors. Even though in general, it's because the region is so water stressed, we do a pretty good job in general in the region. We are the leaders. Now there's one more figure that's really important when we're talking about sustainable residential water use, and that's called the summer-winter ratio. The summer-winter ratio is basically just what measures the change between how much you're using in the winter and how much you're using in the summer. And that is my priority of a metric because the time that we want to limit water use is in the hotter months. Outdoor water use is the biggest problem when it comes to residential water use in a water-stressed supply, in a stressed water supply. So that's why single-family homes with lawns are often way, way, way less efficient. You have no idea the proportion of outdoor water use when you have a green lawn that has Kentucky bluegrass, which is very common. That can be often the vast majority of your water use, depending on what your household use is. That is my priority to eliminate. We have lots of resources in order to do so. I can talk more about that at a different time. But that is a huge priority for conservation professionals, is decreasing the amount of homes that are using non-native, non-drought tolerant plants that are just soaking up all of the water and often in a non-essential way, right? So that's not really the type of housing that's sort of represented in this change. It's an important, I think, facet of it. So once again, while I would never advocate as a conservationist, grow and grow overnight, there's a way that we can work with developers. There are types of housing that are more sustainable, and there are things that we can do. So what are we doing? Because we want to keep an eye on development anyway. A couple of things in Ipswich it's called the WUMP, but it's called the Water Use Mitigation Program. Keep a very close eye on any units that are being added to the water supply. So if you add a bedroom, you're charged a certain amount based on the load that it represents. I talk to the developer, I talk to the plumber, sometimes the owner, the contractor, and I say, what outlets are you using? How are we building this house? In addition to that fund that goes into a water bank that's funded by those fees, first of all, funds my position, and I do conservation programming, but also different programs that we have in the water department. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. We have very aggressive outdoor watering programs that are free to residents. We have discounted rain barrels. We have a program where I'll come out and I will do a survey of your house, the exterior of your house with an engineer, and we'll talk about how we can use your landscape to use less water and support rainwater harvesting. So all of these programmatic efforts, and that's just when there are so many, are there to support Ipswich residents in using less water, which is our big problem, is outdoor water use in the summertime. But in general, we do a really, really good job in Ipswich. Like, one thing that I've seen is that people really care. You know, we're the home of the Ipswich River Watershed Association. They do a lot of great education and outreach and programs. So whatever behavior change that we've tried to inspire as water conservationists or water professionals, the behavior change has been accepted and implemented, or you already really cared about sustainability. So that's very good news for us. Because we are seen as sort of leaders in this way, like every person, every town in the region would love to see our numbers for the most part, right? We do coordinate with other folks in the basin. So a lot of people say to me, oh, Rachel, it's great that we're doing so good, but what about all the people upstream? So we are in the lower basin. We do see the side effects of low stream flow. Because, of course, other people use the water. Some of them do use it less sustainably than we do. So to help sort of address that, we're doing a couple things. There is the North Shore Water Resilience Task Force that Senator Tarr has convened, along with a bunch of other legislators, and dozens of representatives that represent all of the water suppliers in the region. We meet at least monthly to go over what we can do to help the situation. There are lots of specific things that we're doing. We've funded a couple studies about water supply and about the projections of the water supply. We are considering things such as regionalization of sources, what that would look like, how much it would cost, what are the operational implications of that, could we do emergency connections, all the different things like that. Those are things that we're considering on the task force. On that task force, there's a subcommittee that I chair. That's called the Conservation and Demand Management Subcommittee. And the whole goal of that subcommittee is taking the successes that we have experienced in Ipswich, that were from before I got here, years before, and figuring out what else is working throughout the watershed with other suppliers and trying to expand that, giving other communities the support so that we can manage our residential water use sustainably. Continue to do so, do even better every year, hopefully, that's our goal. And again, give other folks the support. That means, do we want to implement a water use mitigation program in other communities? Danvers has one and Hamilton has one, but other communities do not. Not all other communities have very robust rainwater harvesting programs. So these are things that we're exploring. We're using like very sophisticated technology and research methods, and we are convening with people on my subcommittee in particular. We have several water suppliers, several nonprofit folks, and people from DEP and DCR as well. So we are working with everybody that we can. We have, I think, some of the best minds on all of these problems, and we're hoping to continue to do better. So is development bad? Not always. Depends on a lot of things. Depends on how we can work together. As a water conservation professional, I think that it doesn't help to use this narrative of a stressed water supply to cause scarcity panic. There are other things that are much bigger threats to our water supply than small-scale developments in a dense context. And we could always use your help finding those things and learning more about those things and figuring out how to regulate those things properly. So that's probably a better use of folks' attention. And also, please always call me or call Vicki, my boss, if you hear something and you want to know, like, hey, what's the data on that? Because this is public information. This data is your data, and having this information about the water supply can make my job a lot harder. So I encourage you to tell people to call me if that comes up. And our door is always open, except for Friday afternoons. Actually, I do stay on Fridays, so even then would work for me. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I ask, Rachel, if you're familiar with the legislation that has to do with water conservation traveling through our state house, the drought bill, for example?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
The first time, as I understand it, in 3 decades that we've updated our water regulations in the state.
So yes, and I actually had the opportunity to join the Watershed Association last week at their Water Coalition Day, where we talked to all of our legislators that we could get our hands on, and just kind of talked about the importance of properly regulating droughts. And just one more thing on droughts, if that's okay. It's very confusing. New regulations have gone into effect. I have found that because we are in a severe drought right now, and it's been raining, it has really made it confusing and difficult for people. Like, well, how can we trust the government if they're saying there's a drought and yet it's raining? Droughts are determined based on 8 or 9 different factors, not just precipitation. Precipitation only matters if it's the right kind of precipitation. The total amount, I believe, in the Commonwealth has gone up over time. It's the consistency and the level of precipitation that matters. So we are used to recharging our aquifers and our water supplies with consistent, steady rain. We've been getting like short, intense spurts that are not really doing what it needs to for the ecosystem. So that's just one thing. There are lots of other factors. There are new regulations on how we determine the drought status and how local communities respond to it and what levels we put and what restrictions we put. But it's a very, very, very complex, interconnected system. There is no black and white in this industry. And yes, I'm very grateful we have some legislative attention on how to manage droughts. Cool.
So we'll open it up. John, you have any questions?
No, just explain to me again the unfunded mandate. What's your argument to this?
So I don't know what our auditor Diane DeZoglio's goal was for making that statement. What it intimates is that if you're going to build something, the town's on the hook for the infrastructure improvements.
Right.
That's not the case. That's what the opponents are promulgating. The reality is that, for example, in our overlay, the infrastructure exists. So there's very little infrastructure needed to accommodate the building of multifamily housing, and that will be on the developer, as usual. So infrastructure improvements typically fall on the developer, as far as I understand it. But yeah, it's being used as a cudgel, for sure.
You know, the term unfunded mandate, sort of having worked in the government, the term unfunded mandate is usually a very pejorative term, right? And it's usually represents that there's a lot of regulations that will now, new regulations that will now need to be followed, and we're not doing anything to help you cover the costs of following those new regulations. And I don't actually see that there are any new regulations. The town is still going to approve or disapprove projects based on their current standards, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Any new development has to go through all of the zoning board of appeals, zoning, planning, board of select, all of it. That doesn't change. But the 2 years stuck in getting a special permit would. The special permitting was created specifically to slow down development. It was an exclusionary zoning step.
I think that's where I've seen most of the confusion, right? What does by right mean? I try to address it a little bit, but it doesn't just mean you can do whatever you want, right? If you had a backyard, you couldn't just build anything there, right? Even if it did not require the special permitting process. It's just kind of peeling off one layer deep that sometimes is quite difficult to get through, right? It can actually add a lot to the process. But the rest of the processes are still there.
And the folks you're left with who can possibly afford the special permitting process are the developers with deep pockets. And the way they recoup that is to raise the price on what it is they're going to build and sell. So you can see where this does help avoid marking up the sale of a property because you don't have those costs to begin with.
Yeah, like, you know, those townhouses they're building on Washington Street. I got a real estate fancy picture in the, you know, one of those postcards, and they start at $999,000.
Right. Well, looking at Patrick's numbers was,
Yeah.
then of course our realtor Andrea LaCroix is very familiar with
So-
the challenge.
So I don't have a question, but just a couple of statements on housing. So I have a buyer who used to live in Ipswich, and through a situation, he wound up moving to Rowley, and now he's looking to leave. That was a temporary situation, and he cannot afford to get back in Ipswich. And we are looking in Haverhill, which is nowhere
Near-
that was ever on his radar, but there is nothing affordable. I also just listed a condo here in Ipswich with a wicked bidding war. Like, so when people talk about affordability, I mean, if we have more housing stock, like what just happened, I am not happy about the price that this place is going to be selling for, because now every other unit in that place is going to be higher and higher. So it's making condos unaffordable. I just got another one under agreement in another town, and same thing. There were many offers, and my client is paying a higher than normal price, or I guess it's the new normal.
Over asking.
Yeah.
Oh, these are all over asking, but it's like in the realm of, you know, it used to be, you know, I would buy a condo because it's affordable, and now there's no houses to buy, so I'm going to buy a condo, but now condos are becoming unaffordable. So that's just my in the trenches experience. You know, one thing that I'm not happy about with 3A is that I am a proponent of home ownership, but I'm obviously a proponent of living somewhere. So I just wish there were a little bit more of an emphasis on actual, you know, condos, or maybe not single family, but multifamily housings that owned, versus, I know there's going to be a lot of rentals that come out of this, but we're in a dire need for rentals too. Like, we're just in a dire need. I see it every day. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I
realtor
think,
perspective.
like Andrea can speak to it, a lot of our members can speak to it, but it's very hard to see in the general community. So if you see your neighbor's house sell, and it sells for $100,000 over asking, they did great. But you don't see the, 10 other people that tried to get that house and didn't get it. You know, if there's a situation where, you know, there is a land that could be developed, they develop a number of units, even if, you know, they're offered at market prices and things like that, you know, it's a big deal to be able to kind of dwindle down that number, the kind of unseen number who are getting pushed out and are trying, but they're not able to secure any housing that they put in an offer on.
It's an illustration of how out of control it's supply and demand.
It is.
And you do understand that in the overlay, they can be building 3-family homes, double-decker, duplex.
Right.
That it's likely to be a mix of homes purchasing and apartment rentals. And that this is important to clarify too. When the law passes, it doesn't mean that developers are going to swoop in and start building like crazy. That's where Alan Minoyan, our planner, can speak to what he envisions or predicts, and that you know, we'd be lucky to see, you know, perhaps 10 units over 10 years. It's not going to be this dramatic thing that happens all of a sudden.
Yeah, that would be very unlikely. I mean, we look at these, the overlays all across Essex County, and to have just a boom of development would be very unlikely. You know, obviously it's always a community conversation. You get it in spots that the town and the community feels comfortable with. But that feels about right to me. You say about 10 over 10 years, yeah, maybe.
And you want to think about the individual who wants to build a 2-family or a 3-family. Not developers per se, but the individual who wants to make an investment in their family and maybe create a rental income in a multi-family unit. And again, I have to refer to Gordon Harris, our local historian, who is allowing us to use his statement here that there used to be tons of multifamily housing in the overlay. Historically, it existed to feed the mills. And a lot of that space right now is moribund space. It's underutilized and wasted space. So I think it's a exciting, appropriate application in our town. And remember, we're not Hamilton, we're not Raleigh, we're not Milton. So, and the density is slightly less than what exists right now. So, based on that argument too, we won't be seeing high rises. Anybody else have any questions at all?
So I sort of have a sort of a side question. I'm not exactly sure who to direct it to. But when I was listening to your presentation about water conservation and the values of having dense housing as opposed to widespread, those of us who live in the outer suburbs of Ipswich, you might know, do the same sort of advantages apply to other energy, like, electricity?
That is a very good question. From my understanding, denser is uses less in general. I would never speak on behalf of our ELD.
No, I'm not asking.
But
that's why I just made it. Okay.
Yeah, but that is my understanding. But I wouldn't be able to talk on it specifically.
Because I'm just thinking, like, if you modified existing properties or added properties, you have a whole lot of building standards now. So you would actually be improving the energy efficiency.
Most definitely.
Downtown.
And new construction, and
Yeah,
I'm sure Patrick can address that any future development is going to be far more efficient than what we built over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things when we partner with conservationists and we have these conversations, I think a lot of people are surprised that our big overlap is usually density.
Yeah.
It's not like, they think it'd be preserving open space versus filling it with houses, right? That's just a public perception, but really we come together on density. Where you can, share resources and everything's together. You don't have giant lawns and green spaces and things like that. And obviously more density means more housing options for people, and then you're potentially utilizing the water or other resources in a more efficient way. But that's been consistent for all the years. Whenever housing and conservation gets together, that's kind of the topic of conversation. I found it surprises a lot of people.
Lawn grass is the #1 most irrigated crop in the United States. I can't underscore how much that element plays into it enough. And the nice thing is with new development is that we at the water department, we have our eye on that. We're really trying to work with people. And I'll just say again, I think this narrative of scarcity panic has a lot of unintended consequences. When we say there's not enough, there's not enough, there's not enough, even if we are challenged, even if we do have quantity issues, we have to think about who we're excluding, right? Ipswich isn't a terribly diverse place based on many of their traditional standards of diversity. And so who are the people that feel excluded by that narrative? The people who are newer to town, or the people who, because I'm not from Ipswich, people who don't look like the majority of Ipswich residents. And I really believe that conservation or sustainability or water efficiency, whatever you want to call it, belongs to everyone. And my job is easier if everyone has ownership over conservation. If everyone feels welcome into the conversation of conservation. That's when my job is easier, not when people are panicking about, oh no, like who do we have to keep out, you know? Well, that's an important element for me.
I also don't want to miss the opportunity to just talk about how having multifamily housing in our downtown area and within this overlay has the potential to revitalize our downtown economy. You know, people complain that we used to have a theater, a bowling alley, and stores. And this creates a potential for more of that kind of economic development. And pretty much, and again, I refer this question finally to Alan Minoyan, our planner, but my understanding is that we're looking at and talking about when a multifamily applies through the process of planning, it needs to be mixed use. So there needs to be a commercial element. That's exactly what they did to Harbor Light Community Partners with 2 Washington Street. It stopped until they could create a retail space in that housing. And that was a requirement on the town. If you want to build that many units, you must provide a retail space.
But I'm assuming that that would really only apply to, you know, Market Street and
Yeah.
Central Street and,
Downtown.
you know, the business district already.
Exactly.
Because the overlay clearly covers what's now, and I'm presuming would stay, like residential,
Right.
purely residential
Right.
areas, yeah.
Well, if you're going to build down there, it must have.
Well, if you're gonna be right
Retail.
in the downtown, but some
Right.
of the overlays, like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
around
It's
the
not
big
downtown.
church and
Right,
stuff
right.
like that, and that's,
Right.
yeah.
And it was made clear the other day, you must build retail in mixed use. You must,
Yeah.
you know, if you're going to build housing, you must have retail. Otherwise, everybody loses because, you know, and you walk downtown and you see it. The downtown, there's businesses and homes above.
And to
That-
that point, Carol.
Yeah.
With more housing, our downtown is only gonna get better.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm making.
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to
And I have to run.
also remind us that Europe, after the Marshall Plan, when Europe was in, pardon me,
Down.
was in rubble, anybody receiving monies from, via the Marshall Plan were required to build villages. They were required to build homes connected and close. And that's why when we go to Europe, we love seeing the villages for that reason. And then you have your open space. And they very purposefully designed Europe that way because they needed to conserve all manner of resources, especially farmland, for food. No farms, no food, no future. So we're borrowing from that theory in our downtown. We're preserving open space by building dense,
Yes, I think that's a very
Housing.
important point. right?
Yeah.
That
yeah,
it's a way of preserving open space, and
Right.
not taking away from it.
Right.
These big housing developments that are
Yeah.
going up along.
yeah. Yeah. So hopefully we'll see everybody on May 13 with 5 of your neighbors. Thank you, everybody.